Welcome to the Executive Hustle podcast, where I am your host, Kirsten, speaker, author, retired CEO, mother of four, and recovering workaholic. Explore with Central Pennsylvania local executives what it takes to lead well, live well, and learn well. Understanding that leaders cannot survive, let alone thrive, without a spirit of curiosity, a discipline of accountability, and a disposition for vulnerability. Let's dive in. Welcome to the Executive Hustle podcast. Our guest today is Matt Zaun. Matt is an award-winning speaker, a story strategist. He travels the country helping leaders and companies tell their stories, better communicate with both employees and customers. He is a Vistage speaker, father of three, and he loves mountains and presidents. Welcome, Matt.
Some of them.
Some of them. Okay, good qualifier. We could get out of that later.
Thank you for having me, Kirsten. I have a tremendous amount of respect for you, what you do, so it is an honor and privilege to be here.
Oh, well, I'm so glad you're here and feel the exact same way. And excited to see where this conversation takes us. So with that, I often or almost always start with, Matt, did the 7-year-old Matt want to be a story strategist? Did 7-year-old Matt know what a story strategist was?
The couple of years ago, Matt didn't know he wanted to be a story strategist. When I was 7, I wanted to be some version of an athlete.
Nice. Mm-hmm.
And I say some version because that was my experience as a child. So my upbringing was submersed in tremendous work ethic. My father was a double Ironman triathlete.
Wow.
So for those of your your listeners, if
Wow.
you Google Ironman, double the numbers, right? So my father, from a very early age, I remember waking up early, watching him leave, and he would run. That would be his running time. And then he worked at the Bethlehem Steel Company, had a very gut-wrenching, hard job, a labor job. Then he came home and he would get on the stationary bike for hours. And he was a very handy person. He built a lot of different things. So he built a box, this huge wooden box that went around the stationary bike. And on that box was a table and a chair, and I would actually sit at the table and I'd play checkers with him, and I would eat food at times. And that was his training when it came to biking. And then on Saturday, that was his swimming time. So at first he would get a bungee cord and he would attach it to a house, and it would be like an above ground pool that he would swim in. And then because he was incredibly crafty and he could like build tons of different things, he actually went to a scrap yard and he got as much scrap steel as he possibly could. And he built a 5x10 swim spa that he put in our basement. And he had these like incredibly high powered jets, and they were so powerful that he could literally swim. He didn't need as well. I believe he did have a little bit of a bungee cord as well, but they were so high powered that he would have to really intensely work to swim. And then his swim time was on that Saturday. So, and then my mother had a tremendous work ethic. She was a businesswoman, so she was the strategy of my family, where she taught me how to think strategically. So I'm in this household that's just gut-wrenching hard work. So at 7, I didn't necessarily know what athlete I wanted to be or what type, but I knew I needed to do something as it pertained to athletics.
Yeah. Well, and just the hard work that was going to be required for whatever you chose. It seems like that you really had a good start in what that looks like in the models that you had at home. Wow. So I've heard you speak several times, and there is a story about a presentation you had that didn't go well, and that moment being a pivotal moment for you. Could you share just a couple minutes on that?
Sure. So what I do today is I show leaders how to persuade through storytelling.
Yes.
And I do this through many different avenues, one of them being a workshop. I do it through coaching, consulting. And today I've spoken in 30 US states. My goal is to speak in all 51 day. And I'm giving you that compare and contrast version, because what I do today is I do speak professionally, but I was a terrible communicator several years ago, absolutely
Mm-hmm.
horrific. I didn't know how to connect with people. I didn't know how to communicate at all. So it's hysterical to me when I think about what I do today. I really love sitting behind a computer. I love studying trends. I love data. I've always been very strategic in my approach based on my mother and my upbringing in that regard. And I ended up getting into the political world through
Mm-hmm.
a series of events, and I started working for different politicians from an analytical perspective. And the idea was I was really good when it pertained to research, collecting a lot of different data to produce results that the individuals that I was working for wanted, because the goal was, could they actually put up bills that could pass and become law? And I was asked to give a talk to a group of people, knowing that the group was going to be hostile, knowing that they were going to be more of like a toxic type crowd. And my boss at the time, who kind of threw me to the wolves, said, "Hey, I need you to go and I need you to present to this group of people. I can't go. I have another obligation. So I need you to go and speak on my behalf. But I want to caution you, this audience absolutely despises what you're going to talk about, and they hate me. So more than likely, death by association, they're going to hate you too." Now, today, I feel that I've gained so many different skill sets that that terrain would be a lot easier to navigate. Not that I would willingly go into an environment like that.
Right.
Obviously, there has to be an intent to do that. But years ago, that was not the case. This was the most detrimental thing to me. I couldn't
Mm.
sleep. I tossed and turned. I thought of every scenario that could go wrong in my head. And often I think we inflate nerves when it comes to different things.
Yes.
This circumstance was not inflated. I mean, it was an absolute disaster. It was horrible.
Mm-hmm.
To this day, I can almost relive it as if it's happening right now. It
Mm.
was like a traumatizing experience for me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it was also a page in my life that needed to happen. I needed
Right.
to turn that page because I remember after the event, I rushed out to my car. I slammed the door and I yelled at the top of my lungs. I'm looking in the rearview mirror so I can see myself, and I'm yelling at myself, that'll never happen again. I don't know what it's gonna take, but I'm gonna learn how to share a message. And that was my big aha moment. I'm an
Yeah.
obsessive person. I like obsessing over things and diving as deep as I can. And that moment, that sting, that pain prompted this obsession where I said, okay, I'm gonna figure out how some of the best leaders of our time have connected with their audiences. What have they done?
Mm-hmm.
And then that took me down this path of intensive study, and I basically created my own curriculum. I was tearing through books, I was reading and learning, and then I was applying myself. And then I was going and I was teaching different politicians on how to speak, how to communicate, how to utilize messaging strategy. And I got involved in political speech writing, debate preparation, and then that became the launching pad for the business that I have today.
Wow. That is the ultimate comeback story. I mean, you didn't let a huge, traumatic event, challenge, failure, my word, not yours, but stand in your way. And you turned it into an opportunity and a very successful business that's impacting leaders in such a critical area. So the one of the most important things leaders have to do today is communicate and connect with people. And so from this research that you did, this obsession into and the deep dive into all of these orators, what are some of those, top 2, 3, 4 effective strategies or mindsets that leaders have that are the most effective communicators? What can we help our audience with?
Yeah, so the first thing that I would challenge everyone listening to this episode to do is I want you to evaluate your delegation, right? Often we
Mm-hmm.
talk about delegating, and I think that that is really important. That is something that personally I've struggled with
Mm-hmm.
a great deal because I like things done a certain way. So to delegate anything to a team member has been incredibly challenging to me. But often CEOs try to delegate their communication, and they try to delegate their story strategy, and they try to delegate so much of that. And one of the dangers of AI, and I view AI as one of the biggest double-edged swords that society will ever have to deal with. I think it's going to have tremendous positives and tremendous
Yes.
detrimental consequences. But one of the things I see is leaders, especially C-suite, will say, okay, now with AI, we could just delegate all of this. And that's such a dangerous mindset, because some of the most impactful leaders, they utilize stories, often personal stories with business themes intertwined, to connect with people, to prompt that engagement, prompt that inspiration, prompt that persuasion. So the first step is evaluate how much of that are you delegating? And this is from every aspect of our business. There's different buckets as it pertains to communication. So one of the buckets is internal communication. This is your company culture. So from an ROI perspective, are you getting your people fired up to work around the mission, around the values that you have as an organization? So talk about return on investment. Imagine getting double the output from your team. That is a huge ROI. That comes down to company culture and internal communication. Then you have the sales bucket. Then you have marketing. Then you have company culture. I'm sorry, not we already touched company culture. So you have sales, marketing, you have the onboarding, and then you have interviews. Okay, so bringing job candidates on. Every single experience that we go through, we could be asking ourselves, where is the story in this that I can use for one of these buckets? Almost as if I like to connect it to almost like a stand-up comedian, if you will. So if you think of some of the best stand-up comedians, they're constantly taking it through this lens of, based on this experience, how can I produce content material for my next show?
Right.
As leaders, we need to constantly be asking ourselves, where is the story in this that I can use for my next staff meeting, to beef up our sales process, for marketing fuel, for interviews? So from a hiring manager perspective, what stories are they sharing with the job candidates to spark that interest and also to win the talent war so that people want to work for our organizations? And also onboarding. I think a lot of onboarding meetings across corporate America are abhorrent. They're terrible, right? There's stories
They're about
aren't
the
being shared.
rules of our
Exactly.
relationship, not about our relationship.
Exactly, right? So there's
Yes.
all these buckets.
Yeah.
So one of the advantages to this too is when you're going through a circumstance, doesn't matter what kind of circumstance, it could be an incredibly happy experience, an incredibly joyful, excited experience, or it could be a very angering experience, a very frustrating circumstance. That is fuel for our stories, for our, I call it a story bank, right?
Yeah.
Filling these
Yeah.
story banks. So it empowers us to connect with people on a whole other level.
What I'm picking up on, besides everything, is a skill that I'm wondering is a prerequisite to what you're saying, which is a recognition skill. These leaders can't go through the day with their head face down, right? Thinking about what's next on the list, where am I going, what am I doing, right? They have to be aware to recognize what is the story that I just witnessed that I can use in the next staff meeting.
100%.
Yeah.
And there's a business intent, there's a strategical intent. They also need to sit down and create those buckets for themselves.
Right.
So another bucket would be,
Make it work.
yeah, make it work. What are the values that you say you have as an organization? Values from a word perspective are only so memorable. You have to back it with a story. Forget the values of the words themselves. What are the company core stories that exemplify the values you say you have?
Right.
So as a leader, we need to be taking in our experience and asking ourselves, okay, how can I use this for fuel to grow the organization? Steve Jobs, I often bring this up because, again, leaders want to delegate everything as it pertains to storytelling. Do you think Apple would be the company that it is today if Steve Jobs didn't immerse himself with story strategy from a marketing perspective? Apple would not be one of the most
Right.
profitable businesses in human history. And most leaders that are listening to this episode would love to be in a position like Steve Jobs to connect with an audience the way this individual did. He took ownership of that and took
Mm-hmm.
ownership of the fact that, hey, here are different things happening. How can I use this for fuel to create these stories to connect with the audiences
Yeah.
that we have?
He did the work. He didn't just want it, but he also did the work. So as you would
100%.
watch somebody so amazing as him, what are 2 to 3 things that he mastered that made his messages really stick with people?
I think a big thing, I call it stage dynamics.
Okay.
It's really important. Some people call it stage presence. I like the
Mm-hmm.
stage dynamic aspect. So I think that's really important. So studying how does someone work the stage? I
Mm.
think that's absolutely key. So when you think of someone like Steve Jobs, a lot of us that have seen these presentations can almost picture it in our mind. He has a black turtleneck, he comes out in jeans, and
Mm.
the way he is moving his body, the way he's interacting on that stage with the audience, very few CEOs do that. One of the things that Steve Jobs did, one of the many things, is he would look for things outside of the world that he was in. So if you study Steve Jobs, like one of the things that he was obsessed with was writing styles. He was obsessed with writing styles, and he was obsessed with the creative aspect of writing styles, and he was obsessed with art.
Mm.
And he took this idea and how can we utilize this from a storytelling perspective? Now, I'm not saying people listening to this need to do that, but I would challenge them to look outside your world. So like one of the worlds that I looked outside of, it was outside of politics, it was outside of business, was the music world.
Mm-hmm.
What can we learn from musicians, from artists as they connect with their audiences? And you can put anyone in this category. I'm thinking 3 people in particular. So if you think of Freddie Mercury, you think of Beyonce, and you
Mm-hmm.
think of Taylor Swift for
Sure.
for one that's hyper relative,
How can
right?
you not think of Taylor Swift? I mean,
How can you
daily.
not think of Taylor Swift?
If you're
Taylor
teenagers.
Swift, if you're teenagers. However, yes, teenagers, yes. But I would also mention whether you love her or hate her is irrelevant. Strictly from a stage dynamic
Yes.
perspective,
Yeah.
leaders, C-suite, can learn a lot from Taylor Swift from the fact that she knows what she's doing when she's on stage. And those movements are not random in any
Mm-hmm.
way, shape, or form.
Mm-hmm.
She has a training facility that she regularly goes to, and all of that is worked on extensively. When she moves her head this way and pauses, something's going to happen with the audience over here. They're going to roar with
Scream.
applause.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then she's going to walk this way and she's going to go to the stage and she's going to stand at this specific moment and at this specific line, this is going to be sung. And I bring that up because often as it pertains to leadership from a communication perspective, so if we think of a staff meeting,
Mhm.
there's so much random stuff going on.
Yeah.
Where's the strategy with it? I see so many leaders, they view a staff meeting like an agenda item. Let's check the boxes. All right, we talked about this. Let's go on. We talked about this. Where's the strategy and the intentionality behind it? And I think a lot of that goes to getting out of your own world, studying what works for individuals that are on a stage and connect with individuals. What can we do to adopt some of those same strategies ourselves?
I love the mindset of taking what you believe or think or have been acting as random staff meetings and hallway interactions, right? We can put a lot of things, we can lump a lot of things into that category. How does a leader shift their mindset from these are just part of my normal day and I'm getting through them to these are my day? These instances are the places where I show up, and how am I showing up and using them strategically? That's next level, I think, in terms of where leaders can get to in their impact.
Yeah, you have to read between the lines.
Yeah.
Like another example is so for individuals that they have one-on-ones with their senior leaders, often what's blocked off in the calendar, that's where the strategy comes in. So let's say they block off an hour and they're like, all right, in this hour, we're going to talk about one, two, three. I have all these points to discuss with that person. Where's the intentionality before that meeting takes place
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
after? Because before, are you setting your team member in a mindset to open themselves up enough to discuss and be vulnerable with you to
Right.
what you need to get to? So where's the intentionality with, all right, maybe there's some questions you can ask them that now I'm not saying be calculated and come across as this mechanical individual. That's not what I'm saying, but there needs to be some type of intentionality that you're asking certain questions to set them at ease, to try to
Mm-hmm.
get them more into an emotional mindset so then you can have them open up to you about certain things. But everything is so random in business as it pertains to communication. There's not enough strategy with it.
Yeah, I think we see too much fly by the night, uh, types of interactions. And, I had this one staff one time have a real struggle with the word strategic in terms of how we might have these conversations and how we might start with one level of conversation, get a person to a place along a path of a decision, and then move to the next level, move to the next level. And she challenged me on this. She's like, well, that just feels manipulative. I was like, okay, that's a really interesting point in thinking about, is thinking ahead about where we want to go and laying out the steps in our communication to get there, manipulation or strategy? How do you respond to that?
That's an awesome. I think it's a multi-layered question, but first I'll say human psychology is really important as it pertains to connecting with people. I think
Mm-hmm.
from a strategic perspective, I feel that I would be doing someone a disservice to not be strategic in my intent. Prime example, before we hopped on this recording, this episode together, I was talking with a prospect. I had in my mind and on paper a very strategic outline of exactly what I wanted to accomplish, and everything that was shared was very intentional.
Mm-hmm.
That person walked away not feeling manipulated, but feeling uplifted, feeling inspired. And if I was not strategic in my approach, that might not have happened because my goal was to offer as much value as possible.
Yeah.
Because I'm thinking in my head, if I could be on this call for 30 minutes with this individual and offer so much value for free, their thought is going to be, wow, I wonder
Mm-hmm.
what kind of value would happen if I actually
Right.
invested
Engage with
financially.
this guy. Yeah.
So I think from a strategic perspective, you're wasting people's time if it's just random and if it's willy-nilly and there's no strategy with that. Now, with that said, I will make a really important point. I learned the hard way as it pertained to this. I feel that we need to be more curious than calculated. I think this is really important. One of the things, especially in the political environment and when I was doing media campaigns, there's a lot of study as it pertains to questions. So when I was
Mm-hmm.
getting
Mm-hmm.
different candidates and elected officials ready for debate prep, press hall, town hall, press conference preparation, one of the things that you're going through tons of questions, you're trying to figure out like, okay, the reporter's going to ask this, here's a response that you would have. And it
Right.
was very, very calculated because like you're trying to frame certain things, you're trying to make sure that you say a certain soundbite here. And then in the business world, this was detrimental to me because at one point I was too calculated in
Mm-hmm.
what I wanted from the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to give the conversation space to breathe. And we need to be incredibly curious because we might start over here, point A, and we're not getting to point B. We're getting to point C or D or Z, right? Because that's where the individual's taking us. And we need to be mindful and wise enough to recognize, okay, where's the direction that it's going? And then how can I offer value
Right.
based on where it's going, not where I am trying to force it to go.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm often speaking about the difference between leading from your expertise and leading from your curiosity. And that your expertise, I think, would be very similar to what you're saying in terms of I'm calculated. These are the things I want to say. These are my points that I want to get across. This is what I know well, and this is where I'm going to stand, right? My intention versus that curiosity of we're both in this room. what does this room look like? Where are the doors? Where are the windows? What do you have to contribute to what this room looks like? And where are we both going to go, right? That curiosity brings the other, invites the other, and we get more a generative, a type of experience from that.
For
I'm
sure.
curious if there were, so you added, I think, really great concept in terms of here's something from the political world that didn't translate. Were there other patterns of things that did translate from the political world and speaking and storytelling to the business world that maybe are those universals that can be helpful to our audience?
Yeah, great question. So there's a lot that we do in the political messaging world that is not done in business that I think is a major detriment to people
Mm.
in the business world
Mm-hmm.
that we can definitely learn from. One example would be debate prep.
Mm.
So when I am preparing someone to go into a debate, I need to change their environment to get them ready for what's ahead. So if you look at any athletic event, there's training that goes into that. And the goal of a great coach would be, can I take you through such a brutal training that when we get to the athletic field or when we get to the court,
Mm-hmm.
it's not as big of a deal because we just went through all of this training.
Right.
So for anyone listening that, you're a football fan and you see a play that looks like it's so seamless, how many hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times was that play practiced in order to make it look like it was so easy? Well, when it comes to debate prep, I want to put someone in a position to be incredibly irritable. And one of the ways to do that is you look at the amount of food that they would normally have on a normal basis. How about we cut back on that food? How about
Mm.
we cut the amount of calories you're consuming because you're going to be irritable? How about if we make sure that there's major disruptions in your sleep patterns so that you are groggy and you're already in a state of intense frustration? Then I'm going to figure out what kind of questions are going to emotionally, from not a good emotion, but a
Yeah.
negative emotion.
Right.
How am I going to get this person incredibly angry? And I might come up with certain questions to really get them to the point of being incredibly flustered. As we go through that, we're working on strategies on how to combat that from a healthy perspective. Okay. I think leaders need to do this in business. I think leaders need to understand that if you have a meeting where you are speaking to your entire team, maybe your entire company, there are going to be things that are going to happen that could potentially knock you off your game, get you
Mm-hmm.
flustered. Maybe you get a question from one of your team members in front of everyone, and you're a little bit embarrassed because of that. What kind of training are you doing in order to get your mind prepared to do that? And in politics, we do it all the stinking time. Excuse me. In business, we don't. We
Yeah.
don't. So a few strategies that I think are incredibly practical. One, there needs to be a major perspective shift as it pertains to leaders. I want you, everyone listening, I want you, before you go into an environment that you know is going to be incredibly challenging, I want you to view that as a gift. Every politician I've ever coached, I mention to them, if you get yelled at during this town hall, if you have a paid protester stand up with a sign that's a negative sign, take it literally as a gift. Because what is happening right now is, though it can be really challenging and though it's definitely not exactly what you might want in that moment, the entire room is going to be able to witness you as the incredible leader that you are based on how you handle that experience. You are
Right.
going to look incredible if you handle this with poise and with wisdom. So there needs to be a perspective shift. So every leader listening to this episode, if you're going into a hostile shareholder meeting, you're going into potential challenging board meeting, take that experience before you even set foot in that door as a gift. You're receiving a gift from that audience because they are giving you an opportunity to show how incredible of a leader you are. That's first and foremost. Second, and this goes back to something that you alluded to about, you had mentioned windows in the room and the door, that
Mm-hmm.
all, it's grounded in you being present.
Yeah.
And one of the things I always recommend is to feel your own body in that moment. One of the ways you could do this is, if you're seated, feel your legs as they're touching the chair. Feel your feet on the floor. If you're standing, and in politics we work on this extensively, when you're standing, like let's say you're up in front of an audience, in front of a town hall, there's 1,000 people in the room and you're getting shouted at. Feel your feet, the weight of your body literally pull down into the space that you're in. And the reason for that is one of the challenging things that happens is when there's a really frustrating circumstance happen, we often like to mentally check out, right? I think social media has really prompted this mindset in our mind where we're like in another world, where you might be thinking to yourself, I can't wait until this is over. I can't wait until this person stops talking.
What's next?
What's next? What's next? If we're grounded and we're in that present moment, we're pulling ourselves into that space, into reality, and we're telling ourselves, we're here right now. We're not thinking about what we're having for dinner later tonight. We're not thinking about this massive project that's due tomorrow. We're here in the moment and we're connecting with this individual.
And so much more becomes possible when you do that. Yeah.
For sure. Absolutely.
Wow. Yeah. That's very grounding. As you said that, I unfolded my legs. I felt my feet on the ground. Because it's very familiar to me. It's a good exercise. I've done it. I've coached on it. And I think it's just natural when you start to hear those things that you do that. So, yeah. Peter Drucker, I was reading one of his books recently, and in preparation of thinking about today, this quote came out. Organizations are held together by information, not by ownership or command. And that really made me think about the stories and the communication aspect of our conversation and what you do and what you help leaders do. And he was certainly ahead of his time in so many things. The other one I'll bring up, because I was going to ask you this AI question and you preempted me quite expertly by bringing up, what is the impact of AI on storytelling? And even decades ago, Peter said, the more we automate information handling, the more we will have to create opportunities for effective communication. And that's exactly what you said. And that's exactly what leaders need to do, because we're seeing so much more automation. I can even see, you and I both use LinkedIn a good bit, but you can see where their comments to your post are AI generated, right? Because it's just a reverberation of what you have up there. There's no authenticity. And I'm just like, wow, why do I put out the effort if a bot is just going to, comment? And there's a lot here for our leaders and our listeners. So I hope that everyone listening has taken just a lot away today. I'll highlight 3 things at least here as we come to our close. And I have one final question that I'm desperate to ask you. One of the first things that resonated for me, Matt, was we become what we need. And that's exactly what your story has shown, at least me. We become what we need. And that's a familiar narrative, I think, that's out there. Problems and challenges, we need to turn them into opportunities with a perspective shift. So leaders need to see that challenging meeting, that challenging one-to-one, that that question that might be embarrassing as a gift. So switching that perspective so that they can see that as a gift, so that they can rise to the occasion with their communication. However, without these other 2 things that you mentioned, they won't rise. They need to prepare. John Maxwell says you can't deliver what you don't prepare. So if we don't prepare, we won't be able to deliver and rise to that occasion. And I think you've highlighted really strongly that what happens in politics doesn't happen for our business leaders. We need to be practicing this. We need to be standing in the bathroom, standing in front of the mirror, practicing, having people throw us the questions and getting feedback around it. So those are my biggest takeaways, although I've scribbled so many notes during this conversation. It was super enlightening. I do have to ask you, who is your favorite president?
Who's my favorite president? One of my goals is to go to every presidential museum in the country. I've been to 15 so far. I have 2 more on the books, or 2 more upcoming this year. Every single one teaches me something different. I don't have a favorite, and I mean that sincerely, because I feel that I can learn something specific from each and every one of them. I would say that I really like going to ones that are a lot older, a lot,
Mm-hmm.
100 years ago
Sure.
on what they were doing. And I think a big piece to that is a lot of what we're talking about is still relevant
Mm-hmm.
today. That was relevant 100 years ago and will be relevant for another 100 years.
Yeah.
And it's stories that are connecting with individuals. So I can't give you a specific one, but I would say that there's something that we can learn from every single leader. And I do want to end with this, as you mentioned AI again, we will need to be better storytellers because of AI.
Yes. Yes.
Because right now, people's attention spans are shrinking due to all of this information. We need to
Mm-hmm.
be more engaging. And to your point about comments on LinkedIn automated, if you're sharing a personal story with a business theme intertwined, you are head and shoulders above everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So stories absolutely matter.
Yeah. And I think that connection is valuable, and leaders, you know, if nothing else, need to be connecting with people if they want to get ahead in this world of disconnection and distraction. So this is a
100%.
great episode with so much meat packed into it for our listeners. Thank you so much. If they want to find you, follow up, hear more, how might they do that?
Sure. Two ways you can connect with me on LinkedIn, as well as go to my website, which is storieswithtraction.com.
Absolutely. Fabulous. And we'll have all of that in the show notes. All
Perfect.
right.
Thank you. Appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Matt. This was awesome. Thank you for joining me today for another great hustle conversation with the Central PA executive. You can find out more about my guest in the show notes. And if you liked the episode or have something to add to our conversation, please find me on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Subscribe, rate, and review. Remember, leadership is best practiced in community. You know a leader who needs to hear something from this episode, so pay it forward and send it to them today. Don't wait. Until next time, the best leaders not only lead well, they live well and learn well. Bye now.